Hi, sixth period. The last time I read, Molly and Bertrand were in the room with the tree, and Bertrand was explaining how he had moved back to the house and why. Molly did understand. She remembered being alone on the streets with Kip. She had been willing to do anything to get him away from that, including bringing him to the house that her every instinct told her was not safe. She folded her arms, warding off a shudder. How well the tree had known just what Master Windsor had needed, just what she had needed. They had, both of them, come to the tree in desperation, but had they just traded one evil for another? No matter what I do, things only get worse, he said absently. The debts, the loans, it's like an anaconda coiled around me, squeezing tighter and tighter. Molly stared at the thin branch protruding from the wall. It was indeed snake-like. We didn't got snakes in Ireland, she said, a thought forming. A good saint chased 'em off long ago. Bertrand nodded, looking a little confused. I'd heard that. What we do got is lizards. She peered out the window, remembering. Lizards aren't snakes, but they can still bite. Worse, they've bad luck in a garden. Some folks have an old trick for getting rid of 'em. What you do is wait till just before sundown, when the air's cool but the lizards ain't yet gone into their holes. You take a red-hot rock from the fire and set it in the middle of your garden. The lizards, why, they hate the cold, and they'll come running straight for that rock and curl up right on top of it. Come morning, you'll wake to find 'em still on that rock, their bodies cooked alive. She turned back. You see, the rock saves 'em from chill, only to kill 'em in its own way. Down the hallway, Molly heard a faint moan. She took a step toward Master Windsor and placed a hand on his shoulder. Sir, what your wife needs isn't jewels or money or even medicine. She nodded toward the open door. She needs the same thing as the lizard, to get out of the cold. She fixed her eyes on him, hoping the meaning of her story might sink in. You're right, he said. You're right. But Molly still wasn't sure he had understood her. Bertrand bent down and collected the remaining coins from the floor. He stuffed the money into his pockets. For the doctor, he said apologetically. He lowered his head and retreated into the hall. Molly felt a flood of emotions ebbing inside of her, an overwhelming mixture of regret and shame. These were not just things she felt about Master Windsor. They were things she felt about herself. A light lapping of water broke the silence, and Molly caught the familiar smell of salt air. She turned around and saw that the knothole was no longer empty. It was filled with dark water, and floating on the surface was a new letter with her name on it. Molly took a step closer, seeing the careful script written in her mother's loving hand. It bobbed up and down, waiting for her. Chapter 35 is called A Spirited Debate. The mood at supper was grim. Even Alistair, who usually spent his meals happily taunting Penny, was silent. However, when Molly appeared in the hall with Kit behind her, he spoke up. What's he doing here? Now, Alistair, Bertrand said. With all the chaos in the house lately, I could hardly expect Molly to prepare a separate meal for herself and her brother. He'll eat with us tonight. He smiled at Molly. No need to stand on ceremony. Molly led her brother to an empty seat beside Penny. It's very kind of you, sir. She nudged Kip with her foot. Very kind, he repeated, though his attention seemed to be on the platter of steaming mutton on the sideboard, purchased courtesy of Hester's special discount. Quite right, declared Dr. Crouch, tucking a sovereign into his collar, indifferent to the mood of the family. I've always said the only real difference between an Englishman and the most savage foreigner is their place of birth. That, and brain size, of course. Just ignore Alistair, Penny whispered, scooting her chair closer to Kip. He has a stomachache from eating too many chocolates. Molly rested Kip's crutch against the wall and set to serving the table. Since Mistress Windsor was too sick for travel, it had been decided that Dr. Crouch could remain at the house for a few days to monitor her condition. This meant more work for Molly, who had to manage a guest while still playing nursemaid to her mistress. It was a miracle that she had been able to pull off even a simple roast. Molly served mutton to everyone around the table. She noticed that Kip looked a little ashamed, perhaps ill at ease about being inside the house, and made sure to give him an extra big piece of with plenty of fat around the edges. Master Windsor, usually talkative during meals, was apparently feeling more somber tonight. Instead, the silence was filled by Dr. Crouch, who droned on in an almost careless monologue on the finer points of his profession. "The thing that troubles me most," he said, already on his second helping, "is how many of my esteemed colleagues are still taken in by superstition and nonsense." He was one of those people whose speech could not be stopped by something so trivial as a full mouth. Why, just recently the Academy announced it would host a symposium on the existence of the spiritual plane. Can you imagine such a thing? He rapped his wine glass, and Molly rushed to fill it. "I simply cannot understand—" "A little more, my dear. How, in the modern age, forward-thinking men got hoodwinked into believing the unbelievable. Psychics and mediums, more like swindlers and mountebanks." Kip had apparently been listening more closely than the others. "So you don't believe in spirits?" he said from his plate. Dr. Crouch glanced up, looking equal part amused and annoyed. "I believe in the natural world and empirical facts, my boy. Superstition is merely the reaction of a weak mind confronted with what it cannot fathom. Primitive man found spirits in every blade of grass and bush. Take that unusually large tree in front of your house, for example." Penny perked up. "Oh, it's a magic tree." Preposterous!" Master Windsor cut her off. He smiled at the doctor. "I don't know where she would get such an idea." "But the child proves my point," Dr. Crouch rejoined. "In a less enlightened age, people would call the tree magic and make up a story. It would likely receive the same treatment as Homer's lotus blossoms and the proverbial Garden of Paradise, which coincidentally archaeologists now place in the outer regions of Persia. Hardly paradise, if you ask me." "Not all stories are made up," Kip said. Molly was unnerved to see that he was looking not at the doctor, but at her. She shot him a glare, warning him to watch his manners. "Of course stories are made up, my boy. Otherwise they'd be called facts. We in the modern age should know better than to believe in such flim-flam. Returning to our magic tree, clearly the surrounding soil provides a unique balance of nutrients that perfectly suits its nutritional needs." He popped a slice of roast in his mouth, "much as this mutton suits mine." Kip seemed undeterred. "What about good and evil?" he said. "Are they just made up too?" Dr. Crouch gave an amused chuckle. "It seems we have a little philosopher among us." He put down his knife and fork and folded his hands over his belly. "Young sir, please don't think me unreasonable. Indeed, I am a slave to reason. The curious mind investigates all possibilities. I only ask for scientific rigor. If you say the spirit world exists, I say, show me your proof. And if you could produce such proof, why, he would find his name embezzled alongside the greatest minds in history." He stared above the table, his eyes shining at the thought of achieving such immortal glory. Bertrand clapped his hands together. "All right, then," he cried, apparently keen to change the subject. "Who knows any good corkers?" The remainder of the meal was unremarkable. Kip finished eating and retired to the stables to tend to Galileo. Molly cleared the table and set to preparing Dr. Crouch's room for the night. She made up the sheets, eyeing the portable medicine chest he had brought with him from town. It was filled with a vast array of notebooks and jars and shining scientific instruments, a traveling laboratory. She stared at the strange tools, wondering how they worked. Surely such marvelous equipment would be able to cure Mistress Windsor's sickness. She wondered if they could do more. Molly dropped her work and rushed to Mistress Windsor's room. She found Dr. Crouch at the bedside. He had a special glass tube called a thermometer inside Constance's mouth. He took it out and examined some numbers at the end. "Well, that's not right," he muttered, frustrated, and put the glass back in her mouth. "Any luck with the patient?" Molly said from the hall. The doctor sighed. "I'm afraid not. Crouch fever seems to be incurable." It took Molly a moment to realize that he had taken the liberty of naming Mistress Windsor's illness after himself. "I've tried everything I can think of with no success." You've not tried everything," Molly said. "I've been thinking about what you said at supper. The curious mind investigates all possibilities. The man showed visible pride at the idea of hearing himself quoted thus. Well, what if it's some kind of magic that's done this? Ah, I see. Dr. Crouch stood, a patronizing smile on his face. Irish, yes? I forgot that yours are a credulous people, prone to superstition. He patted her on the shoulder. It was not my aim to confuse your little mind with speculations about natural world. I seen one, Molly said, a real live spirit. His smile froze into something less patient. You mean you thought you saw one? He snapped his fingers. Perhaps delusions are another symptom of this disease. Okay, I'm going to stop there for today, and I will be back tomorrow. Have a good rest of your day.